Oh, well. 10 years. Good
I
amount
know.
of time.
I know.
Yeah.
Holding something here.
Geez, I can get that done. I'm only 77.
Oh,
He's 84.
84?
Yeah. Geez, I'd be 7 years ahead of him.
Next in line then.
Yeah.
That's why I never show up, you know? It's like bringing an umbrella with you. It's not gonna
The whole fan family's here.
No, the whole ag zone.
to get ready for the next day.
And the thing is, we're only worried about one kind of person. That's it, really.
Oh, size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're only worried about 3 points. 3 points.
Good evening, everyone. Now that it's 6 o'clock, I would like to call the April 9th, 2019 meeting of the Auburn Planning Board to order. The first item on our agenda is a roll call. We will introduce ourselves beginning at my far left.
Mark Cardiff.
John Engler.
Brian Carrier.
Nate Hamlin.
Evan Sear.
Sam Scoggin.
Stephen Martelli.
Dustin Booten.
Katie Boss.
The next item on our agenda is typically a review of the previous meeting's minutes. Those minutes have not been prepared, so we have nothing to review in that section of our agenda. It gives me great pleasure to move on to our next item. Tonight we have an award for a gentleman. This gentleman has provided 10 years of service to the Auburn Planning Board in addition to 3 years of service in the comprehensive plan. He's worked countless hours for the city. He's been a member of the planning board as well as chairman of the board. And so it gives me great pleasure to recognize Mr. Robert Boyer for his years of service to the city. So Bob, if you could come up. We normally keep our name tags, but just to make sure that Bob can't come back, I'm going to send him his tonight. We really appreciate what you've done for us.
Right. I had close to 40 years experience as a planner in Massachusetts and in other communities. And there's an adage among the planning profession that when you're a planner, you need to look to the future. At this point, they put you out to pasture. Right.
I'm equally excited to announce tonight that for the first time in quite a few months, we have a full contingent on the planning board, as we have added 2 new alternate planning board members to the board. Those members are, to my far right, would you prefer Katie Bossy, even though you're Katie Bossy? And to my left, Mr. John Engler. So we look forward to their input. Since we're on the topic of new members, I'll discuss their role as associate members. Associate members on the board have full rights to discussion. They can ask questions, they can comment, and participate in the meeting. However, they are not voting members during the meeting. However, if a regular member is absent, then an associate member steps in and acts as a voting member during that meeting. Because we have a full contingent tonight, our 2 associate members will be acting as associates tonight, and that again, that means that they'll have the ability to participate in discussion, ask questions, but will not be included in roll call votes. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing, a site plan review for 101 Merrill Road for Future Guard, Inc., which is a Phase 2 factory expansion in the industrial zoning district. So that everyone in the audience is aware of how our public hearings work, we will proceed by receiving a report from the staff. During that report, or following that report, members of the board may choose to ask questions of staff. Once that is completed, we will ask the applicant or a representative for the applicant to come forward, provide any information that they feel is important, or answer questions that the board may have. Once the board is satisfied with that, we will open it up to the public input section of the hearing. That is when we will invite members of the public who wish to speak on the topic to come forward, ask their questions, present their ideas. When that is complete, we will close the public input section of the hearing, and we'll proceed to discussion and motions. So, to the end, are we ready?
We're ready.
Excellent, thank you.
All right. You'll notice up on the screen the site plan or the location of the property in question is 101 Merrill Road. It is the property of Future Guard Holdings, LLC. They are coming before you tonight for a special exception and site plan review because the proposed expansion of the facility is larger than 5,000 square feet. It is a proposal, I'm sorry, of 10,000 square feet. And it is a proposal for an expansion of 14,000 square feet to the rear of the property. This is a building that has been in place for a number of years. In fact, we were trying to go back and determine exactly when this building was built. But as you can see from the site plan, it is a large building of roughly 150,000 square feet. The expansion would be to the rear. There would be no change to the hours of operation, to the number of employees, to the number of truck trips. This is, my understanding is this is an expansion for warehouse and delivery space to make truck deliveries and drop off in an internal environment easy and operable with the internal configuration of the plant itself. Because of that, there is some driveway expansion or paving that would occur. However, the total impervious area is not expanded by that much because the applicant has come in previous to this year with a modification that is removing some of the paved area to the front of the building and replacing that with landscape. So just so we're all on the same page, I had the applicant give us a understanding of some of the numbers involved, and primarily this is because Future Guard has future plans to expand further, and it's good that we all start on the same page. So the existing building is roughly 152,000 square feet. The proposed would be 163,000 square feet for a total impervious surface of roughly 326,000 square feet with a net change in the front, the creation of front landscaping. Staff recommends approval with the condition that the erosion control measures along this drainage here meet the state requirements for double silt fencing while under construction, and then appropriate and final mitigation and under complete construction. The applicant is here. Mike Gatto, if you want to answer any further questions about the project itself. At this time, staff concludes its report.
Are there any questions for the staff? Seeing none, Mr. Gatto, would you like to come forward?
Yes, my name is Mike Gatto. The staff has done a great job in the review of this project, and I really don't have anything to add. I'll answer any questions that you folks have or the public may have.
So it's our understanding that so this is a phase 2 of a building addition. Is there any sense for how large this project might eventually become? Is it going to be a single building? Or
No, it's all going to be an expansion to this existing plant, and the idea might be that we will now, we're working on the intake end of product coming into the plant, and we may need to expand the far right side of the building. There's a jog on the right now, far right corner in the front, and we may have to expand that side to some extent in the future to help in terms of shipping larger products than what we're shipping today. So we have no sizing yet, but I mean, it'll be, you know, probably anywhere from 30 to 50,000 square feet that will be added if everything goes well.
what's the nature of the manufacturing going on?
They are making awnings that you see, retractable awnings that you see on buildings. They also do canopies over commercial buildings, the canopies with the frames and stuff. You might see those things. They're looking at expanding into maybe a 3-season room with screen or windows with those canopies. So that's what they're looking for. We need this expansion for powder coating, the painting product, and the cutting of the pieces of metal and stuff to size, so that we can sell more product of what we're doing today. So this will also help with the future expansion if we take on that other option. We're still looking at designs for those type of products.
Mike, how long have they been in business in that location?
I'm sorry I don't have the total history, but I'm guessing
Rough estimate.
somewhere around 1990-ish, they moved into that facility. That's my guess. The building's been there, as best I can tell, since around late 60s, like 68, 69. It hasn't changed much. It was a shoe factory, a tonic shoe factory years ago.
Great.
Are there any other questions from the board? Seeing none, thank you very much. At this point, I would seek a motion to open the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and a second. All those in favor? We'll now open the public input section of the hearing. If you wish to address the board, please come forward, speak into the mic as these meetings are recorded, and please begin by stating your name and address. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm B. Roberts. I live on 736 South Witham Road. I'd like to just say a couple words about the ag zone, as my family just bought a farm there, a 16-acre farm there 2 years ago.
I apologize. So this part of this is specific to the item in front of us. We will absolutely have
Okay.
time for public input. It sounds like you definitely want to discuss the ag zone.
Yeah, so when is that available? When are we doing that?
The ag zone is actually our next item on the agenda.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm
No, that's
Thank you.
fine, I understand. Yep. Is there anyone that wishes to speak specifically to this project in front of us? Seeing none, I would look for a motion to close the public input section of the hearing.
So moved.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll give it to Mr. Martelli. All those in favor? Okay, as far as discussion goes, quite frankly, I thought that this was a great project. It's growing a business in the industrial zone, and that's what we want to see. So, is there any input from other members of the board with respect to this project?
I'd just say it doesn't get much more straightforward, and it is nice to see that development happening there.
Seeing a lack of discussion, I'd be looking for a motion on the topic.
I motion that we approve the site plan at 101 Merrill Road for Future Guard Holdings, finding that, with the following conditions, A, B, C, and D under the staff recommendations. Do I have to say them all? Okay, great.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Carrier. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is a workshop. We are going to continue our look at the Agriculture and Resource Protection Zoning District. We are seeking information from specific parties, and the board expects to ask some questions based on the presentations so that everyone in the audience understands. This is a workshop. Generally, workshops do not include a public input section. However, last month we had quite a good turnout, and we felt that it was prudent to seek input from the public despite it being a workshop, seeing that there are so many people here tonight, so I can gauge how many people had anticipated being able to speak with regard to the Agriculture and Resource Protection workshop item. Okay, several. All right. Again, normally we don't take a public input during a workshop. Seeing that there are several people that came and wish to speak, I will allow for some public input at the end of the board's discussion and question and answering section. And when we get to that point, I will ask for I will give sort of some guidelines as to how we would like to proceed with the public input, given that it's not necessarily a normal part of a workshop. So if you can bear with us, we're going to receive some information. I think this is great that we have so many people from the public here to get this information as well. The information that we are seeking was specific to a set of questions that we developed at our last workshop. We wanted to make sure that we had a sound understanding of how many parcels a change could affect and in what way, where, in what way it would be affected and where those parcels might be. We wanted to reach out to experts from the state with regards to understand and the agricultural community to understand what constitutes a legitimate farming operation as opposed to a garden or hobby farm, for instance. We wanted information on what other communities similar to ours have done when faced with similar predicaments, like the restrictions within our ag zone. We wanted a review of the recommendations that the consultant study and ad hoc committee had made. And we asked that we be provided with feedback from police, fire, and schools with regard to thresholds for road maintenance, school enrollment, tied to population density within different parts of the city. So that is the information that we will be looking at tonight. At this point, because the board is not necessarily acting on anything, we're really here to receive information. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Knight, and she can lead us through the presentation that has been put together based on the planning board's input from last meeting.
Great, thanks, Evan. So just to recap, on our first workshop last month, essentially we reviewed the comprehensive plan and how it views the agricultural and resource protection zone. We reviewed the fact that it covers up to 40% of the city's land area. The planning board came to some discussion regarding some non-negotiables in terms of what any amendments to the ag zone should achieve. One is that a reduction in the 50% income rule should be addressed, that in this era it's not appropriate necessarily, that any change not promote residential over agriculture, that it must not spur sprawl or growth in the rural areas of the city, that it must not favor either small-scale or large-scale agriculture, neither should be negatively impacted by a change in the code, and that forestry ought to be looked at in some way regarding the Resource Protection District and agriculture, as it currently constitutes up to 75% of the ag and resource protection zone. So there was a question of how, if it should be treated differently, and if so, how. So with that in mind, we have brought in the experts in the state. They are very graciously offered to share some of their time and knowledge base with us in helping us to answer some of those questions. So we have the invited experts, Stephanie Gilbert and Mark Hedrich from Maine Department of Agricultural Conservation and Forestry, to help us answer a few of the first questions, which is regarding farming, what constitutes a farm business as opposed to a hobby or a garden, and a second question regarding what other communities have done in regards to these issues. So with that.
All right. Good evening. How's that for a sound level? This is a very powerful mic. How's that? Okay. Thank you for inviting Mark and I, and audience, pleased to meet you. What we have done to help you is to take a look at some of Maine's statute and rules regarding what is a farm. That's looking at different components. The first here is farmland. So my first 10 or so slides will be addressing the first question, and then the last slides. I believe you have a copy of the presentation, and we have extra handouts on the table in the back of the room. So according to the Farmland Property Tax Program, which is the basis for many of the other statutes that are in the title that is administered by the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry, is a reference to a title that's under the Maine Revenue Service jurisdiction. And so this is the current use property tax. It was created in the 70s and 76 following the creation of the tree growth property tax. The farmland definition tells you there, especially in the green bold, when we're looking at farmland, it is a contiguous piece of farmland, and you have the photo to help you think about that, of 5 contiguous acres, which is farming or in agricultural activity. So in the photo that you're seeing, the farm buildings that are there, and this is Tender Souls Farm in Richmond, those would not be covered under the farmland property tax. It is specifically designed to cover the current use of the land and what is that land producing. So the income requirement for this program is $2,000 per year. Again, this was enacted in 1976. And farming or that income of $2,000 gross value can be derived from crops sold or crops that are used by the farm household. So
just to clarify, if you're going to enroll in the state tax program, this is how you need to meet those
yes,
standards.
these are the criteria.
Okay.
So I thought it would be helpful for you to look at that since you're looking at farm size. The federal definition of a farm is sets an income requirement of $1,000 per year. If you're looking at what is a farm, there's various definitions in state statute. A farm here, reading through all the details, is basically focused on, is this entity in commercial production of agricultural products? So each of these definitions are talking about an entity that is using multiple resources, land, plants, livestock, buildings, structures, equipment, infrastructure like ponds and irrigation systems, etc., in an integrated way to produce agricultural products. So our photo on the right is up in Blue Hill. This is a grain harvester, thresher. And what I've tried to do in my photos is sort of move you from times of past to times of present. So when we think about farm products in Maine, our agriculture is extremely diverse. So the same diversity you see reflected in the photos of the folks here who are farmers of today, you see that our farm products, our market basket offered to the state and outside to the region and nationally includes forages and sod crops, grains and food crops, dairy products, poultry and poultry products, bees, livestock and livestock crops, manure or compost, and fruits, berries, vegetables, flowers, seeds, grasses, fuel crops, and other similar products. A farm operation is a set of activities that occur on a farm in connection with commercial production of farm products. And a farm operation, in addition to many of these activities, is involved in employing farm labor, not just the farm family, but many part-time and full-time employees. And so the farm of today moves from being a family operation to a business, an important and viable business on the landscape. A farm operation used to be carved out of the woods, like you see in the top left, and cleared in the bottom left. That's in Aroostook County. The first photo is Blue Hill. The bottom center photo is a USDA stock photo as the one is on the right, but this is our future in Maine in many areas like Auburn, where you have the urban or rural interface. You're going to see suburban subdevelopments up against farmland that hopefully is protected by some sort of firewall from being further developed, as your ag zone has done for you for so many years. The farm operation is using machinery. It involves labor. It is activities can include all sorts of regulated products, pesticides. It can include all sorts of issues that require farms to have room around them so that their activities are not considered nuisance complaints by neighbors and other businesses. I will just go back to the one slide there, Audrey, if you would. On the bottom right, a good deal of the country in California, parts of New York, and the mid-Atlantic, you're seeing much more agriculture under glass, or here in Maine, certainly for extending the growing season, it's under some sort of row cover. But as climate change impacts agriculture, we have to think ahead to more and more structures. Okay, next slide. So for Androscoggin County, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is about to release its 2017 Egg Census. They do the Egg Census every 5 years. April 11th, later this week, is when they're taking that data finally and releasing it. So this is why I can bring you only 2012 data, but a chance for you to do take a little snapshot here and understand across Androscoggin County, the total acreage in farms went up from 2007 to 2017. The total number of farms went up. So that's trending. This is a place farmers want to come to farm. This is a place where farms hopefully are growing in size, but you see the average size of farm decreased in those 5 years by just a little less than 10 acres. The market value of products sold, these are all crop sales is 1/4 or less than the livestock sales for this region, and I do think a good reason for that is the history of dairy farming in the region, and then dairy farms diversifying and moving into cattle and replacement heifers, etc. The average gross income per farm, not net, is there for you to see. Government payments from the U.S. Department of Agriculture factor in, and you see the average per farm for this part of the state. So agricultural products in the state and at the federal level do not include trees grown and harvested for forest products. And I will speak a bit to that third question, but just to make you fully aware, we're looking at graphs again from the Androscoggin Egg Census. And on the right, you see in the kind of gold yellow, most farms in Androscoggin County and in Maine are a good deal forested. I think across the state, it's more along the lines of 60 to 65% forested, and the rest open or land that's not farmable. So this is probably consistent with GIS mapping that you've presented to the community as far as the lands in the ag zone. How much is cropland, how much is forested in the farm parcels. Then the additional forested land, I wouldn't be able to tease out from this census data at this level for you. And then on the right, you want to take a look at farm size. So the greatest number of farms are from 1 to 9 acres, according to the 2012 census. Then the next largest group by farm size is 50 to 179 acres. And so you're really looking at differences in scale, and glad to hear that a recommendation or questions from the planning board have been not to exclude one type of or one scale of agriculture for another, because again, the strength in the economy across the state of Maine, the strength in agriculture is diversified crops, diversified scales. Next slide. Okay, before let's be sure we do some questions. If you had any on those slides.
Do you happen to have any data on the gross income for the smaller farms? I guess I'm surprised that there were so many in the 1 to 9. And so we saw these numbers. Mm-hmm. Are these?
That's an average.
Which side? Right. Yeah. This is what I'm saying. This is a mean, right?
I have some slides about beginning farmers, but I had actually pulled out a slide that was about income data for farms in the first 10 years of farming. But I can do a follow-up email for you
I think that
tomorrow morning.
That would be helpful.
Absolutely. My recollection is that the gross margin for a small farm, a beginning farm, so you'll see something about scale in the coming slides, but that in the first 5 years, the net is on the order of $7,800.
That would be like a net.
That's the net. And in the years following, then it ranges from 20,000 to 25,000 in years 6 through 10. And that's looking across beginning farmers in Maine of the 4 different typologies that I'll present to you. So one of the challenges, obviously, when you look at different scale is, and to go back to the very beginning in your question about what is a hobby farm, most farmers don't really want to be called a hobby farm. Maybe they're working full-time and part-time at home as an avocation or a business they're going to retire to or grow into, to retire the day job and work full-time will grow. So most farms will say, I'm not a hobby farm, I'm a small farm. Wouldn't you agree? Yes. Yeah. Mark Farms in Union, Maine, and he works full-time for the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. So most of our farmers do have someone in the family working off the farm because families are growing and health care and health insurance is important. For cash flow, most farms are depending upon outside farm income to carry them through the low cash flow portion of the season. So why don't we go to the next question, because it will cover some of this demographic for you. So your question is, what have other communities done to meet the same goal or address the same issue? So starting looking statewide, Mark will cover a couple first slides.
Okay. Well, there's been a number of things done around the state, and people look at a number of different things. There's a lot of environmental aspects of farming that most of you are aware of, I'm sure. And so you have to look at things like surface water quality, how is the farming operation going to affect the rivers, the streams, the brooks, and so on and so forth. Is there going to be runoff from livestock operations? Is there going to be fertilizer, pesticide runoffs, for example, from crop operations, those types of things. And along that same line, you're looking at groundwater quality as well, because they're all related. Surface water, groundwater are interrelated very, very closely. Many folks don't seem to understand that, but it really is true that that is a fact. And then we look at air quality too. Not so much of a problem in Maine from our farms and our livestock operations as it is in some other places. As many have said, much of our air quality issues come in from the Midwest and so on, and from their power plants out there, and so we are at the end of the tailpipe, as people usually say, so we have to suffer the consequences of that. In many areas in the Midwest, you do have much larger farms. There are some air quality issues that arise from some of these farms. Nitrous oxide, excess carbon dioxide, methane arises, certain other things. We don't see those problems so much around here, as I said, as we do in other places. Again, you've got solid and potentially hazardous waste issues. In pesticides and chemigation, we always hear about that. Pesticides are used by not just agriculture, but many pesticides are used by many homeowners. And if you've probably seen, many of our municipalities are now putting bans on the use of certain pesticides within their borders for various reasons, trying to encourage people to get away from using those types of things. In fact, I think in South Portland right now they're looking at using goats to come in and graze some of the fallow areas to keep the weeds and brush down, rather than having to use chemicals to do that with. In fact, I had a question the other day, well, how many goats do we need in a certain area to achieve this purpose? Well, it's kind of an open-ended question and not always easy to answer, but anyway, that's one example of the types of things that are happening. Pesticides are used by many crops, blueberries, corn, smaller vegetables. And of course, you have some organic pesticides that are used as well. Wildlife protection, certainly we're a state that values its wildlife. We have an abundance of it. We have all types of things. We have turkeys, we have deer, we have moose, we have, we have many of them. And there's always concern about maintaining that wildlife base for our own citizens, but certainly it's a big factor in bringing business into the state. People come in and go hunting every fall. It's a tremendous, I don't know what the figure is, but there's a tremendous amount of money that's brought into the state by the fact that we have this abundance of our wildlife in the state. And so we have some, Stephanie has some guidelines that have been developed by the department on soil and water conservation, creating new agricultural fields, expansion of existing fields and forestry areas. And I think there's some over on the table, still some over on the table over there, I think. A state soil scientist developed many of these guidelines, David Roque. He's really excellent at what he does. He's quite an environmentalist. He's really, I regard him as a genius in soil and water conservation and in the types of things that he does. He's written many publications for the department and for the public that relate to soil and water management, to conserving resources.
So we have another one there.
Did I miss one?
No, we have our next slide.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the state, we have an agricultural compliance program. We have 2 people who cover the whole state. So it's quite a job. Generally, one of those folks will cover the northern half of the state. The other will cover the southern half. Doesn't always work out that way. They cover complaints from the public, from municipalities, regarding farms and farming operations. And this ag compliance program works hand in hand with the right to farm law, which handles those complaints between farmers and neighbors, or certainly others. And we resolve those complaints, usually fairly expeditiously. I will say, on a lighter note, maybe it isn't lighter, but many of the complaints received really are not valid, and folks see the ag compliance program, a federal agency, as a means of getting back at their neighbor or even a family member for some perceived injustice that, that they feel was done against them. So it's pretty easy to sort them out usually. But we do have that type of thing that goes on from time to time. And it's quite amazing how many family members sometimes do fight with each other, which is kind of distressing, but it does happen a lot. So the purpose of that program is to try to keep farmers farming, keep the agricultural base, keep them operating, and we think that by having that program, it helps to keep farmers going, keeping that land in agricultural production as well.
And
So
you review that ordinance, so to just speak to that point that.
So we have a so-called Maine Agricultural Protection Act, it's usually known as the Right to Farm Law, although ironically the term right to farm is not mentioned in it anywhere, but essentially what it is, it's a defense available to farmers against nuisance complaints brought by neighbors or against municipal zoning violations where it's determined that enforcement of those ordinances involved would prevent the farmer from engaging at or observing, doing best management practice on the farm. The whole right to farm law is based on a farmer utilizing best management practices that essentially have been developed by the department and others. There's many of them out there. There are many sources of best management practices. We have a manual in the department that's currently undergoing revision, but just look on the internet under a certain problem issue and you will find a myriad of recommendations and best management practices for how to resolve that issue. So we do have that law in place that helps to protect farmers against nuisance complaints, but they do have to be observing best management practices. There was an old adage out there that said, well, I'm a farmer, I have a right to farm protection. I can spill manure on the road if I want to. I can do whatever I want. I can create all these odors. I can spread manure up to my neighbor's fence on the 4th of July when they want to have a party outside. No, that's not the case. The farmer has to be observing best management practices in order to have that protection. So what kinds of complaints do we get? Just think about all the activities that occur on a farm, and if odor complaints, we have manure handling issues, manure storage. Some of the more common complaints we get do relate to water quality. Some will say the farmer's spreading too closely to my well or my property line. I think it's going to be a problem. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. There are many factors that are involved with that. We do have guidelines and setbacks that are related to addressing that kind of thing. Many farms of certain size are required to have a nutrient management plan that's developed by a professional nutrient management planner, and they go out there on the farm and they look at everything that's there and they develop that plan based on a site-specific basis, based on what they see. So we have dust issues, not so much in southern Maine, maybe a little bit up north where we have larger fields. Certainly we have livestock welfare issues. Usually the farm animal welfare is taken care of by our ag compliance program, but with the other animals, the smaller animals, we have an animal welfare program that addresses those kinds of issues. And of course, you potentially have insects and impairments to water quality. All these things are kind of interrelated. So if you had good quality manure handling, good quality manure storage the way it's supposed to be, you're not going to have odor issues, at least not as many as you would otherwise. You're potentially not going to have the insect issues as well. You're not going to have the impairments to water quality that you might see otherwise. Noise issues. Some people complain about noise issues. We don't get very many complaints about that. What happens often is folks will move in next to a farm thinking, well, I really love the bucolic atmosphere out there, and it's gonna be nice, and I like to steam the cows in the pasture when the vacuum pump comes on at, 4 o'clock in the morning, and the farmer goes out to spread manure very early in the morning. Then the farm doesn't look quite as enticing, or maybe not quite a nice area to be in, but, so. And we do have some cull potatoes issues, mostly up north. We have laws about when cull potatoes have to be covered or gotten rid of, because if you leave them out too long, spores develop, and you know what happens, they infect the exorbitant frogs, so we don't want that. And certainly there are other issues, but as I said, think about what goes on the farm, and we're going to get a complaint about it, usually.
So an important point is that the draft ordinance that has been advanced to our agency, Mark is reviewing that for consistency, but it's a draft ordinance by state growth management and the Maine Agricultural Protection Act combined. The final ordinance does need to be reviewed by him to make sure that there's no barriers to farmers practicing the best management practices in your ordinance language. So far, he's seeing not seeing too much. No. So that's good for you to know, but just that's an important checkbox in the process going forward. Going back to the farmland property tax program, because in this set of questions we're talking about what have other towns done, and so the first slides were what's universally happening as in terms of regulation of farms, what other towns have done in this state, especially in York County and Cumberland and up the mid-coast, where there's increasing development pressure in the last 20 years, have moved to invite our agency and my counterpart in the Forest Service to come and explain the current use property tax programs in public workshops with assessors present and landowners to learn how do you enroll. Again, this is a strategy municipalities are using as a way to hold the current land use pattern in place. Your ag zone has held a land use pattern in place in a different way. You can think of those landowners who would voluntarily enroll in the farmland property tax program as voluntarily creating an overlay zone over the town of Buxton, and by enrolling, they meet the criteria of 5 contiguous acres and the income of 2,000 annual gross income. I noticed in the study that was done by Crossroads, Ken Meter did do an update saying the USDA looks at $1,000 by $1974, I believe. And so if we go to 2017 dollars, that might be an income threshold of $500 or $5,300. So you could say, when in the next 2 years our agency is working with Maine Revenue Service, we may be looking not only at the valuation for different classification of farmlands, but also this income threshold. But the important point for you to remember is that the farmland property tax program only addresses the land. It doesn't do any reduced assessment on the structures, and farms are structure heavy. There's the residence for the farm family and farm labor. There's storage and housing for livestock, for crops and equipment. Another strategy towns are using, so just to give you an overview, and sorry for the very small numbers, but every year the Maine Revenue Service does do a compilation of the municipal valuation. So this is a report you see from 2017, right at the top. Androscoggin County in 2017 had just under 9,500 acres in all of the county enrolled in the farmland program. But if you look down at York County, you're seeing just a little bit under that, 8,000. If you're looking more in the, and I was looking at this hoping to see more of the urban or suburban areas where there's that development pressure to see a higher enrollment. Again, this is a strategy, and it takes educating the landowners about the opportunity. So state enacted a law in 2007, and the rules are written, and two municipalities have actually taken these rules in law and created their own local programs. So you see the seal here for the town of Winslow. It has created a voluntary municipal farm support program. I believe that Crossroads did look at this and make some recommendation in their report as well. The long and the short of it is, this is an opportunity for a town to create a program whereby it protects, it reduces property tax on farmland and farm buildings. In exchange, the landowner, who voluntarily enrolls and applies, is granting a 20-year conservation easement to the town. In Winslow, how they do this, all of their documents are on their website, all of their processes on their website. The town of Monmouth looked at that, made some modifications that matched Monmouth, and they passed their ordinance last June. Winslow passed its ordinance in 2016. So other strategies for you to consider, and especially when you think about different farm types. Sorry, this pie chart color is completely different from when it left my computer and got to Audrey's. But what you want to understand is, when the Egg Census is done, there are 8 farm typologies across the United States. So the important take home here is that for Maine's beginning farmers in 0 to 10 years, it's all of that graph except for what's stippled. So there's that 30% chunk of 4 other types that are larger farms. Some of them are corporations that are not even family owned, big business. There's 4 typologies that have fewer beginning farmers. And then the other 74% of the pie here represents the small family farm that's generating less than 150,000 gross. The small family farm that's between 150 and 349,000 gross, and you see the percentage of those farms. And the off-farm occupation, that's your day job and farm at the same time, and then retirement farms. So I have a definition of those, I think, in the next 2 slides down. So the total land and farms in Maine overall for the whole pie chart is 1,400,000 plus land and farms. So you would expect, and be surprised by the next, you would expect that income might be similar to this pie chart, but in fact, of the 4 typologies that include Maine's beginning farmers and other farmers who have been on it, on the land and farming for a long time. The next slide shows you that while they own 70% of the land, they're generating 23 or earning 23% of all farm income in the state. So one of the most important strategies any community can take, farmers working with customers and consumers, planners, elected officials, is to pay attention to that partnership that brings more opportunity for business development and economic development. The next slide.
Stephanie, can I ask you a quick question about what is the definition of a small family farm? What size is considered small?
If we go to the next slide, you get a bit of the typology. So here you go. The retirement farms, which we can flip back and forth to the pie chart, are small farms whose operators report they are retired, although they continue to farm on a small scale. So maybe that's where you say your hobby farm moniker might be. The small family farms at the bottom, it's all based on the gross cash farm income. So that's what makes that determination more than size, Audrey.
So land area really doesn't matter?
No, but I could look at the new census data is coming out April 11th, so Mark and I can take a look with others and see, and we can actually talk to USDA Egg Census people to tease out something more for you. Happy to do that. And then the off-farm occupation farms are those small farms where the operators have a primary occupation other than farming. So Maine's landscape, as you saw, 70% of the farmlands are owned by these 4 types. And yet, 23% of all farm income. So it tells you maybe something about the scale, but I couldn't say for sure. I'll see what I can tease out for you. The next slide is my last slide to sort of, in a snapshot, lead into what are other municipalities doing. Your question was, what are other towns doing? And I didn't tease out for you goals other than many towns in Maine are trying to keep their farms in their community. Farm families have long tenure. We have farms in Maine that are 10 generations deep. We have new farms starting. We have people moving from across the country to Maine for its quality of life, for the land values, for the water resources, and especially if you're going to move into livestock agriculture, the best crop we grow is grass. And I don't mean this one you smoke. I mean the one that's the pasture. We have just the right climate and soils. So environmental protection and economic development are what many towns are looking at in different ways. So municipalities with community groups, and you've got here reporting to you in this process, your conservation commission, your mayor, your committee the mayor formed, and I'm so sorry I missed the Bates students presentation last night. Just a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience, longtime farm families in the zone, and new farms in your community. So towns in Maine, I have a handout, you pass it through. Yeah, so I didn't have this for all of you, but the towns in Maine, one that's really done a great job looking at co-marketing, where other small business, coffee shops, bookshops, maybe even spas, I'm not sure. But Cape Elizabeth has formed a Cape Farm Alliance. That's a community group with the town looking at fishing and farming and the community, and really growing the profile of the farms in that community and what they have to offer for product throughout the year, and just linking, as I said, co-marketing, different business promotion opportunities. So that's great consumer education. Tourism and events, some of the towns that are doing pretty interesting things are years ago, Androscoggin Valley Soil and Water did a bike tour from farm to farm. It's happened also, I think, in Franklin County, and it's happened in Knox, Lincoln. I think with the Dresden farmlands, the farmers there and their community being a leading force with that. The Tour de Farm. Bowden Hamm has its own open farm day, and that's open artist studios and farms on that day. And this year that'll happen more in September. New Gloucester, years ago when Pineland was starting to become all that it is now, New Gloucester revised its agritourism ordinance to really expand scale and meet the expectations of Pineland's projections. Bonding, towns like Scarborough, Falmouth, and Wells have used bonding to raise funds to then match state and federal money to help purchase conservation easements, purchase development rights, and then farmers grant agricultural conservation easements. Creative farmland owners like the owners of Mitchell Edge Farm in Freeport approached the town and got a residential subdivision approved. In addition, the town required so much land as open space with public access, and then came to the Land for Maine's Future program to get public and federal dollars for the farmland protection. So that's taking different tools to marry a unique protection effort that's near Wolf's Neck Farm in Freeport. Transfer of development rights, Gorham has a process on the books. It's all about protecting farmland. I don't know, you'd have to, planning staff, look into what Gorham is doing. Different communities in Maine have used TIFs to promote producers and processors, and two that came to mind are obviously the Backyard Beauties in Madison, and recently Skowhegan did a TIF to Crooked Face Creamery, which is a cheese operation. Sanford years ago protected the town farm as part of a multi-parcel protection effort funded with Land for Maine's future funds. The town donated a conservation easement on its town farmland and recently sold that to the orchard across the street that for years had leased it. Water districts and land trusts, this is a trend across the country, and in Maine I really do hope it is something that comes to greater fruition. This last weekend I was at the Land Trust Conference listening to Sebago Clean Waters talk about their partnership with Portland Water District, Luneco Land Trust, and Western Foothills, and this is to say that the Sebago Lake watershed, 74% of it is forested. I think that's close to your number. And the concept of developing a water fund to help protect the lands. I guess the cost that it might be to protect all, or with a conservation easement, or to purchase forested land that filters the water for Sebago Lake. The cost to protect that in this presentation, it would be 40 times that to put in a filtration plant. So I believe Lake Auburn also is a very pristine drinking water source. The Auburn Water District and I think Androscoggin Land Trust, Shelley's here, she's nodding her head, they're working in partnership. Just the last couple here, Bowden Hamm Community Development Initiative is grants, micro grants in the community to help farms with purchasing equipment or that sort of thing. And many towns, there's a big list. Over the years, I've worked at the department for nearly 20 years, and many towns are always reaching out to their community of farmers to do a needs assessment and find out, what do you need? So I'm pleased that's happened here, and so much good work has been done. The Conservation Commission's report is very comprehensive. The Maine Planning Association does have a fabulous listserv, and whenever there's something happening with agriculture, I know that Eric Cousins, he's always chiming in or making a query, thinking about the Auburn zone. So just wanted to address the forestry piece a little bit for you. And I touched on it with the reference to the Lake Auburn watershed. But I'm not a forester, Mark's not a forester. Dave Roque, who wrote these guidelines in lay terms to help all landowners and municipal officials understand the fundamental needs, help you appreciate that forestry and forest lands are a completely different ecosystem, and the conversion of the 14,000 acres in the zone, your regional forester could not be here tonight, but he said he absolutely would meet with landowners on their land. Dave Roque, the state soil scientist, will do that as well. I've been with him around the state when he's meeting with the landowner who's considering doing some clearing of land to look into the soil, what is the water drainage, look at the soil's physical property, the topography, many of the different factors that are going to affect surface and groundwater, sedimentation, erosion. Those issues are very important. As your Conservation Commission report pointed out, the Maine Forest Service, as well as Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, probably could help you in a separate workshop or presentation when you're really zeroing in on those forested lands to present their professional expertise to you. So on that note, thank you. I'll take questions. Mark will take questions, and hopefully we're still in your agenda timeline.
Yeah, so any questions? Stephanie and Mark will stay up here through the rest of the workshop to answer other questions as they pop up. Do you want to move forward, or do you want to ask questions directly to these two items?
I think there are some members of the board that have questions specific to this, so I'd like them to ask now. Mr. Martelli.
Have your studies included vertical farming as well as horizontal farming?
I know what you mean by vertical farming. I've seen it happen in photographs of stacked greenhouse. We don't currently have a facility like that. I haven't personally been to Backyard Beauties to know in their cultivation and propagation. I do know that for some of the really large grocery companies that are producing, say, their own, like Whole Foods 365 variety, that you're seeing microgreens and lettuce greens growing in that sort of vertical orientation, all under glass, yeah. But we don't have data here in Maine about that in Maine. I could gladly look into it for you if you wanted.
Second question. I notice there's an elephant in the room for Auburn, and that is marijuana. Have you considered that as a crop?
There is a law, I can't, without looking it up, give you the title. It's not any part of my work in the department. There is a law that has classified industrial hemp, but there is the special opportunity to become be reviewed and licensed for medical marijuana dispensary, but I'm not versed in that beyond that. We do have several in our department who are working with growers of industrial hemp. In most of our grant programs, I do operate a grant program. There's clear definition of anything other than industrial hemp as defined by that law and statute that passed 18 months to 2 years ago is not eligible for grants.
And my
So
last question would be, goes back to how much money the farm produces each year. You said $2,000. Mm-hmm. Who controls under taxes, or is it under a police action type thing? Or? Sure.
So that's, farms are required to self-report, and we could go back to the farmland slide. I think it's about 6 slides back. The farmland is going to be the next one. All right, so you can see that that generates at least 2,000 annual gross income. Actually, I think we go almost to the beginning. It's the second slide in.
All the way?
Yeah, sorry. Boom, 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 boom. There you go. So you can see it's after, you see Title 7, Section 152, in accordance with the law and the bulletin that Maine Revenue Service publishes, landowners who enroll have to report in 1 of 2 or 3 of 5 years. I help a lot of landowners understand the program, understand how to apply. They have to submit a map. They have to identify what's growing there. I do have a form that helps them convert pasture land to hay because they're trying to determine the value, and it's a little difficult unless you can extrapolate to hay bales. But I encourage them to report in every other year. But by statute, an assessor could, for a farm that was enrolled, say, you haven't reported and you better report.
So that would that include leased property also?
So the farmland property tax is very important to dairy farmers who lease land. Their operations and their reporting can make that landowner of that land eligible for the program. And so I did not include it here. I do have a form. Farmers can submit their Schedule F, their income tax report for the farm, to the town. Some prefer not to have that in public record. So we do have a form with an attestation that lets them itemize everything that they are producing. So it's important to note it's what the land produces. The land is producing forage. It's not the cattle and the hanging weight of the cattle that are part of this income calculation. They're secondary, they're herbivores, but it's what the land is producing. So we're really looking at the land cover. That said, farms often do report all their other products, their eggs, their hanging weight of their beef, and so forth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that $2,000 threshold was set, you said earlier, in 1970?
It was set in...
Has there been any discussion to index that to inflation since then?
I think we're about to do not only a review. The Department of Agriculture and Maine Revenue Service must work together, and we're starting this year to review the valuation rates for each farmland type, and we will definitely be reviewing that income threshold. Something that happened in, say, 2009, the legislature removed firewood from a crop that could qualify for this because it was creating some borderline farmland protected parcels. Folks were using the firewood to fill the income requirement. An important distinction between the farmland and the tree growth program, a similarity is that they're both going to use the same tree growth rates for valuation of soft wood, mixed wood, and hardwood. The tree growth land, which is a requirement of 10 acres or more, must have a forest management plan. And then all the harvest, it's driven by the forester's recommendations and the forestry permit. Farmland can have forest land. It's assessed at the tree growth rates. It's not required to have a forest management plan. But in all of my work with farm landowners, I'm encouraging them to be good stewards, and most of them, this is why they own the land in the first place, is to be a good steward of all the resources. So again, forestry is a completely different natural resource industry. That the tree growth property tax, the calculation for what will be the valuation from year to year has 18 different variables in that metric. Some of it has to do with the distance from that forest in that region of the state to the marketplace for processing. And those tree growth rates are set by the legislature annually. Whereas farmland, with the diversity of the crops that we have, it's very difficult across the state to look at all the different variables in the market value of those crops, but we're going to take a stab at it in the next 18 months.
While we're talking about the income requirement, the state utilizes $2,000. On a slide you have here that the federal government utilizes $1,000, but in reality, this actually $5,300.
Well,
so,
Ken Meter, who did the Crossroads report for your zone, put in parentheses, if we update
okay.
the figures,
so that's where that number came from?
The
okay.
figures from, I think, 1974 with USDA, it would be $5,300 in 2017. So I think it is realistic. I think our 2,000 annual gross is a low threshold. I believe that in Monmouth, with their voluntary municipal farm support program, they did set a threshold for participation in that program at between 5,000 or 10,000. I can check and let you know. I will get back to you on that.
Stephanie, I had a question. I think you may have had a slide up there earlier about the average income for the farmers in general. Was there actually a slide there that broke it down into small farms versus larger farms?
I had a slide that I had pulled out. I will get you more than you want on this data, but to really help you look at the different typologies, all 8 typologies in Maine, and what might be the income ranges for you.
My last question was,
sure.
Your statistics are driven by people that are filing the tax paperwork for farms and for the individuals that are actually putting in for the tax relief. Is that correct?
The statistics for the municipal
that you're using are driven by the fact that the people that are saying that they're filing is that they have a farm.
Yes.
And that they, some of them will apply for the tax relief.
Yes, yes, yes. The farmland property tax program is one assessor, Bob Tripp in Westbrook years ago said, it's the farm's easement with the town. And I mean, it is just for the farmland. That voluntary municipal farm support program steps it up. So many farms struggle with yes, there's a reduced assessment on the land, but assessment on buildings, especially if you are replacing a building, or in cases where towns have done revaluation and they've seen a dilapidated building and yet assessing it at modern day replacement costs. And that is a hard pill to swallow. So in Dover Foxcroft, long conversation to get the assessed rates on farm structures back to reality.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you for your presentation. That was really helpful.
Good.
I'm interested in what you had mentioned earlier, Stephanie, about how supporting greenhouses and other row cover or other structures that extend season is important for climate change. Are there other things that we should consider as part of the ordinance language that would help in a changing climate?
Well, I think as we remember the past couple of years' drought and listen on the news and hear how it affects the blueberry producers down east, fluctuations in hay production. Last year, I think hay was a challenge. So when we have a drought year, of course, it's pretty difficult to irrigate haylands, but for the small fruit and vegetable producers, it's critical that irrigation is something that's considered and not ruled out. So when you're thinking about your farm size, you know, irrigation needs a pond, and a pond's going to be sized to the crop's water need. So my important message when you think about farm size is the basis for most of our statute is that 5 acres. That's from the farmland property tax law. But I think it still makes sense. If you have farms that are less than 5 acres in the zone, they're not going to be eligible for the farmland property tax program. They could be eligible for the open space program. But also, if you think about, is there enough land for that farm to diversify at whatever scale and number of crops it's producing? Is there enough land for it to build the infrastructure that's the crop that's for 4 seasons cash flow versus the summer crop or the, you know, animals out on pasture? So it's why I presented this multiplicity of strategies to just really help you see the diversity is your guiding principle. Allow as much diversity as possible. And that includes thinking about those farm businesses that need to have an on-farm retail operation, parking, that sort of thing. Some towns have definitely had to revise their ordinances because they've had something that said 90% of the product sold in the farm store has to be produced on the farm, and yet the customers are looking for everything from A to Z. Yes, they want it local, but so just thinking about those sorts of barriers to commerce. And in terms of climate change, just, you know, we don't know what all the adaptation will need to be. Pest cycles are going to be another challenge, so you're welcome, Katie.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much. As I understand it, we have some additional information with regard specific to Auburn and the previous ad hoc committee and the consultancy.
Yeah, this should probably be breezy. There are not very many slides here. What I'm going to do with the next two or three slides is review the highlight summaries from the 2017-2018 consultant and ad hoc work group on ag. The ad hoc committee was established to serve in an advisory role to the City Council, the Planning Board, and City staff during the length of the contract term with the Crossroads Resource Center, which is what Stephanie has referred to in report form. One of the major realizations that the committee came to is that there's no simple answer, that the policies to be enacted depend on the purposes the city wishes to uphold in protecting farmland. And I think that's a critical observation that came forward from that report in committee. As we've discovered, They also identified the following community priorities and strategic goals. To protect open space in the rural landscape, that forest land is a big part of the AGRP, strengthen agricultural and natural resource sector of the Auburn economy. The 50% income rule should be changed. However, the alternative guidelines that could replace it are not simple. Infrastructure investment and incentives are needed to support the agricultural sector, especially in an unpredictable environment, and there's a need to determine the best incentives available. And I think what is meant by that in terms of the infrastructure investment and incentives is getting product to market. Those investments in facilities and services to get product to market. Protect farmland for agricultural uses and foster productive use of AGRP lands. Hold price of working agricultural lands low. Protect natural environment with special emphasis on Lake Auburn. These are just the highlights from the summary report that you all have in your packet, and it is available online in the Ag portal. So to summarize, the primary recommendations essentially included the recommendation to create a permanent committee in the City of Auburn to advise City Council on policy development and implementation of agricultural, forestry, and resource protection initiatives similar to an agricultural commission or agricultural commissions formed in other communities in Maine and nationwide. I believe there is a move afoot that is considering what an agricultural board or advisory board would consist of and what their role would be. Second, the elimination of the 50% income rule within the AGRP zone, but replacing that policy only with a fully analyzed, researched, and targeted alternative that will serve long-term goals and priorities for the AGRP zone and economic sector. So these are quotes directly from that report. I do believe there probably are some members here from the ad hoc committee that may want to address this further, but that is essentially the summary from the ad hoc committee. With no further questions on this at this moment, I'll power on through the rest. One of the primary questions that was asked last time is fundamental to this discussion: how many parcels could be impacted, and what would the potential impacts of the text amendment be? And this is a really tough question to answer. So we're looking at this within a 5-year time frame. We packaged some maps, and I will be walking through those. Currently, the text has some provisions about division after the first 5 years of enactment for the purposes of constructing a home. There's also language regarding division of land for residential purposes being not allowed, but it can be divided for purposes other than residential. And there are numbers calculated based on acreage and ag-only road frontage on existing roads. And by that, I mean this chart essentially is a summation of the current composition of parcels in the ag zone. What you'll see as we go down the columns and rows, there are a number of parcels, in this case 100, that are currently vacant, that are greater than 10 acres or more, that also have 250 feet of road frontage. So in determining what could potentially be developed with a home, we are looking at the current standards, which require 250 feet of road frontage. So based on the existing road pattern and the zoning pattern, these are some of the findings in terms of the division of parcels. So there are roughly 100 parcels. Average acreage of those parcels of greater than 10 acres is 51. There are occupied parcels of greater than 10 acres with up to 500 feet of road frontage. There's 57 of those. There are vacant parcels that are greater than 3 acres on any road frontage. We're only showing 10. There's a small caveat to this. There are landlocked parcels within the ag zone. By that, they're interior parcels that are surrounded essentially by other ag or other zones. There are up to 99 parcels in that category. There are parcels with no road frontage in the ag zone, but they have parcelable frontage within other zones. And we'll walk through the maps to indicate what some of those might be. Vacant or occupied parcels that don't meet dimensional standards, i.e. they don't meet the road frontage standards, they're up to 224. The other parcels, interestingly enough, are owned by either PG&E or the state or the city or a conservation easement or the water district. So there are up to 3,500 acres in the ag zone that are owned by entities that will not be developing them for anything. So as we look at this series of maps here, some of them are on display on the wall, primarily the north and south maps. The areas in pink are land parcels identified as greater than 10 acres in size with 250 feet of road frontage. The yellow parcels are considered to be occupied parcels that are greater than 20 acres in size and have at least 500 feet of road frontage. You'll notice the black striping. That is your rural residential and your country residential strips along the frontage of the interior ag parcels, which you'll see also in gray. So these parcels here, this gray is in the ag zone, but it is also fronted by developable parcels that are in the country residential or rural residential zones. So there's a number attached on each of these, which you, I knew you wouldn't be able to read them from this distance. They're like little dots, but those numbers indicate the number of parcels that could potentially be yielded by a division of land into 10-acre parcels with road frontage. The total number is estimated to be around 540 for the entire city. So this is looking at the south. Again, the pink parcels are greater than 10 acres in size with 250 feet of frontage. The purple parcels are greater than 3 acres with road frontage. And again, these are with road frontage only. So an interior development could potentially occur. So in this case, you have extensive road frontage, but you also have large interior land areas. So anything with a road ultimately could meet the same dimensional standards. So again, this gives you an answer to potential development of lots of 10 acres in size that meet the dimensional requirements that are currently in the ag zone. They do not necessarily include any split zoned parcels. So in getting to the last item on the agenda in terms of the questions for the workshop, issues that came up are regarding city services, schools and bus service, road complaints. Typically, once you have residences and you have potholes, we hear about it. So that might be an issue. Response times from police and fire, those will typically be obviously longer response times. Both police and fire in their response to this question essentially said their concerns are not necessarily for residential development out far away from from the core. It's more of for emergency services that may have to do with more industrial type or hazardous materials that may be occurring out in the rural areas that are of most concern to them in terms of response times. And from the school board, unfortunately, we were not able to get a direct response in time regarding the potential impacts, but I did get a response regarding the school systems in the school districts that could be affected. The East Auburn School District, the Danville, Sherwood Heights schools, and the Walton school districts. So those areas would be potentially affected by new households. So the directive that City Council has given to the Planning Board is, the draft has been forwarded to Planning Board as drafted by the Mayor's Action Group, has been forwarded to the Conservation Commission and the Planning Board for review, public hearing, and recommendations on how to proceed with the amendments. So that is the simple answer to 6 questions. Some of them are broad brush, some of them are in depth, and that concludes our presentation materials for the workshop.
So before we proceed, I would like to ask the board members, do you have any questions on those topics that you would like further clarification on, or that you feel were answered but maybe not to your satisfaction during this presentation?
Audrey, could you please explain again why the pink parcels were highlighted as pink, and why these groupings that were highlighted in the map?
Why the
why
the breakdown?
Why were the parcels broken down as they were? I didn't understand that.
So currently, the agricultural district has a 10-acre minimum lot size. So there's a natural breakdown at the greater than 10-acre mark. So the pink parcels are broken down at a 10 acres or greater threshold. There's a proposal, the current amendments are proposing that existing lots that are less than 10 acres in size and at least 3 acres in size be permitted for development with an agricultural operation. So we currently have, we're trying to map at least existing parcels that are greater than 3 acres in size that do have lot frontage or road frontage. So that explains the purple parcel. So we've got purple and green. So the one that's remaining is the yellow. And I believe the occupied parcels in yellow, those are fairly large parcels of much larger size, I think, in general. What those show is the opportunity for division because they have more than 500 feet in road frontage. So these maps are intended to indicate potential developable parcels in the ag zone only that show the criteria for the 250 feet of road frontage on the existing road network.
And to follow that up, you mentioned a number of 540. Is that 540 lots in addition to what we currently have in that zone?
Correct.
Okay. That includes the 3 acre, sort of between 3 and 10 acre?
Correct.
Is there any other clarification or follow-up?
I have a process question, and you'll forgive me if it's an obvious question since this is my first planning board meeting. So the proposed ordinance amendments are both going in front of the planning board and the Conservation Commission concurrently, is that correct?
Correct.
And how are those two processes speaking to one another?
Excellent question. We will be getting communications back from the Conservation Commission. I believe at this time they are scheduled for the 16th of this month, if my memory serves. where they will have a public hearing and give us their recommendations and comments as well. So our timing is a little off, but we will have those communications in time for our currently scheduled public hearing on May 14th.
Thank you.
And actually, as a point of order, so that people understand, this is not, this isn't coming in front of us as a text amendment. So the board handles text amendments to zoning, and in that case, they can be initiated by different groups. They can be initiated by the board. They can be initiated by the council. They can be initiated by citizens. And when those come before us, we weigh in and send a recommendation to the city council as to whether or not we believe the ordinance should be adopted with findings to justify our decision. This process is different. We're not looking, we're calling it a text amendment, but it's not currently a text amendment process. In order for this to become, I guess in order for this to become a text amendment, that the official process would have to be started. So it's my understanding that our recommendations, along with the Conservation Committee, are going to the City Council, and then the City Council will choose how they want to move forward, whether they amend the draft, how they want to amend the draft, and then it may come back to us in a formal process. And I say that just so that everyone understands sort of where we are in the whole process. Yeah. Are there other questions or clarifications? I would just like to reiterate that I would really love to see that slide that got left out with regard to the income. Yeah.
Probably send it when I get home to South Portland.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully this has been as informative for you as it has been for us. This is our second workshop receiving information. Next week we'll be next month actually, we'll be holding a public hearing where we will begin drafting our recommendations to the City Council. We may draft our recommendations in a single meeting, or we may take 2 meetings to draft those recommendations. Those recommendations will happen, the formulation of those recommendations will happen in a formal public hearing. So again, if for some reason you leave here tonight and you know there's some input I really wanted to give, or if there's some input you come up with between now and next month, know that next month there will be a formal public input section of that hearing as well, specific to this topic. So to that end, again, normally we don't open it up to public input at a workshop, but I'd like to honor your time and your commitment in coming and trying to help the city work through this process. Can you please try, because there are many people that would like to speak, can you please try to limit your comments to 3 minutes or less? Because we are recorded, please begin with your name and address, and please don't feel that you cannot speak if your address is not an Auburn address, okay? We ask for the address as a matter of public record. I think that, and I hope I'm not I hope I'm speaking for the board when I say, I think what might be helpful for us is if you feel you have input or further questions specific to what we've heard tonight, that would be incredibly helpful. I understand that you may have prepared remarks that are not necessarily in line with the information we received tonight, and we'd welcome those. But again, the board is really trying to work through the questions that we raised last meeting and understanding those given the information we have tonight. So to that end, I will ask that anyone who would like to speak, please come up.
Well, thank you. I'm Mary Sylvester. I live at 208 Maple Hill Road, and I had the honor of being elected the chair of the task force that worked with Crossroads Resource Center. And you did an excellent job of summarizing the work that Ken Meter and Crossroads did. Our task force worked very diligently on this. I'd like to just reiterate a couple of points that was also part of Stephanie Gilbert's presentation, and that is the importance of feedback from farmers. One of the things that you mentioned is listening to farmers, and that's something that was a hallmark of Ken Meter's work. He interviewed somewhere in the vicinity of 90 farmers and people involved as stakeholders in this process in the course of making the recommendations to us that he did. So there was a built-in mechanism in his work to listen to farmers, bringing the expertise that he also has about agricultural issues looking into the future. And it was the heart of our recommendation around the importance of an advisory committee for agriculture with people who are farmers or experienced with farming. So just to speak, to reiterate the importance of the expertise of people who are farmers, work in the field, and others with expertise, I think it's critical. Many of us worked really hard to figure out some of these issues, and things that we thought were simple, we discovered they really aren't. But farmers knew a lot about it because of their everyday experience. So I just want to affirm that and wish you well in this work. We know it's not easy.
Thank you.
My name is Terry Daly. I live at 1054 North River Road. I'm not on the committee, but I attended every meeting of that committee. I went out and drove.
May I ask a question? And I apologize for interrupting. Because we have two committees. And so I've noticed that in our discussion, even we've become sort of perplexed sometimes. So are you referring to the ad hoc committee under Mayor Labonte or the most recent action committee under Mayor Levesque?
The committee that Mary.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize for interrupting.
So what I did is I drove around Auburn, and I would highly suggest anybody do that. I went to every street, every lot. And what I determined, and her numbers were pretty close, that there was about 100 lots that could be built on. So I suggested what we do was any standard lot, that's 10 acres or more, that existed at the end of 2017, if it did not have a house on it, you would be allowed to build a house. That would stop the growth, because that was a big fear. We were going to have 200, 300 houses. When I broke that down, there really is only about 63 lots that could be built on. And there's different reasons, like Wallingford Orchard owns, and they're not going to divide up their stuff. So it came out there's about 63 lots. The city of Auburn used to do 80 houses a year, and I think we're doing about 40 houses a year now. So that's what started this all off. There was no growth in ag zone. What I want you to take away is, please drive and look at these locations so you understand what you're looking at, what everybody's talking about. It's worth the effort. It took me 3 Sunday afternoons to do it. But I want to start a farm. I'm coming to Auburn because we're building this brand new school, and I want my child to go to that school, okay? That puts me at 30 years old, let's say. I have 2 kids. I need to buy a piece of land in ag zone to be able to farm. There's not many farms for sale in Auburn. If you check that out, you'll find there's very few. So not only do I have to buy the land, I have to put a house up. Not only do I have to put a house up, in order to start farming, I have to buy some equipment. It could be a small tractor, let's say that multi-purpose Kubota at $22,000. You've got to look at what it really takes to have a farm. I know because I built a brand new farm on North River Road. And it takes an incredible amount of money. So as you're coming through this, and we want it to be farming, I mean, I added on to my barn. I would have loved the city to say, we'll give you a tax incentive, like you talked about, for the money you put in that barn. that would have helped me a lot, but that money came out of my own pocket. So when we're talking about farming, to come in and build a brand new farm, you gotta ask yourself, is that possible? And how much money will it take? And if that were the case, we would not have this huge housing spurt in Auburn, because you could, what I did is said, okay, if you have an existing lot and you want to subdivide without getting into subdivision laws, which you have, you're only allowed to build, you could subdivide, but only build one house every 5 years. That controls your growth. As far as how you legally make farming happen, that's a whole different question.
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question.
So I thank you. I hope I didn't take more than 3 minutes. But
no, that was my my 3-minute timer, and you know, what's a few seconds? We appreciate the input. So.
So it wasn't a huge number.
Right.
Okay, take two. I'm Bronte Roberts. I live at 736 South Witham Road. We own a 16-acre farm, and when we bought it 2 years ago, that would make me the 9th generation farmer in Maine. So this is a subject very near and dear to my heart. I would just encourage everybody to read what the report that the Bates students put together. I'm sure you all did. There was a really interesting point that was made that despite a lot of the residential corridor exemptions that were made along the ways that decreased the land area of the ag zone, that the population of Auburn actually decreased. So maybe that isn't the panacea to socioeconomic growth that we think is opening up a lot of residential corridor areas. I don't think that anybody that lives in the ag zone is against change. What we want is change that takes into a holistic, sustainable picture of socioeconomic growth and ecological diversity. And that we don't want to see the continuing degradation of hard, blue-collar working families that have to fight to make a living and build small ag businesses. So whatever you guys decide to do, please consider that we don't want to continue seeing the same economic trends that have sort of devastated a lot of our communities over the last 3 decades plus. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be quick. My name is Dennis Wheeler. I live in Pownell. I grew up in Auburn on the South River Road, on the Jordan Screw Road. My ancestors, namely James Wagg, is in the archives here. He fought in 3 major battles in the Revolutionary War. We still have the land that was given to him by the state of Massachusetts, some of it. Some of it is given to Bell Farms. But I've been trying to build, I have a lot on the Jordan Screw Road, the very first lot in the agricultural land. It still belongs to our family, the Wags, we're now the Wheelers, but I don't know how I can build a retirement home on that piece of property, other than it's 3 acres of land. I really can't farm on that, but I'm looking for someone to help me to make a change so I can build a retirement, my wife and I can have a retirement home there. So I've talked to Eric. I've been pursuing this for about 2 years now. So I would like this committee to think of that. It's the first lot. The lot number I have is 115002. So if anybody can help me with that, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Shelley Kruszewski. I'm the Executive Director of the Androscoggin Land Trust, and I'm also a resident of Auburn, 7th Street in Auburn. And we're just making comment. We thought it was important to clarify to the planning board and to the community at large what our role is and what role we can play going forward. So just reading from our mission, the Androscoggin Land Trust is dedicated to protecting through land conservation and stewardship the important natural areas, traditional landscapes, and outdoor experiences within the Androscoggin River watershed. We've been carrying out this mission for the last 30 years and currently conserve over 5,000 acres from Durham to Jay, including land in Auburn. And our office is located in Auburn, right across Main Street. We own about half of the land that we conserve. The other half we hold conservation easements on or agricultural easements on. And we conserve fields, wetlands, bogs, forests, and farmland. So the core of our work is stewarding the properties we conserve and creating opportunities for people to connect with the land in a variety of ways. So in terms of farmland and forest land in particular, ALT currently protects over 1,000 acres of working farmland. Properties, there are about 8 different properties, only one currently in New Auburn, which is utilized for hay protection, habitat protection, and recreation. We also conserve over 2,000 acres of working forest lands and a lot more forest land in addition to that. But just for context, statewide, land trusts play a big role in protecting working lands. They conserve 36,000 acres of working farmlands, and more than 85% of the acres that land trusts have conserved in the state of Maine, and in 2017, that was 2.14 million acres total. So 85% of that are working working forest lands. All of this is to say that we are a local land trust in the area, and we conserve agricultural and forest lands. We're here as a resource in terms of conservation options, and we work with other land trusts, including Maine Farmland Trust, which is a statewide land trust. And according to Maine Farmland Trust, only about 4% of Maine land is composed of prime soils, ideal for agriculture, and of that, 1% is already developed or in the process of being developed for purposes other than agriculture. 1% is conserved. So Auburn can play a role in helping preserve a portion of that remaining 2% of prime soils, ideal for agriculture, for the future of local food and culture in Maine. So the Androscoggin Land Trust is interested in protecting the natural resources of Auburn for many reasons, including the services that they provide to a city and its residents, such as clean air, clean water, and flood protection. So these are all services that we all depend on and affect all members of our community. So conservation land is an important piece of comprehensive economic development strategies. It provides stability for natural resource-based industries, opportunities for public recreation, supports our quality of life, supports the tourism industry, and the other services that I previously mentioned. And it just, one of Maine's greatest assets is our natural resources, and Auburn is in this unique situation of having a mix of urban and rural land with abundant natural resources. And these two land uses can really complement each other with strategic conservation. So as part of this process, there could be additional community-led research to determine resource conservation, resource-driven conservation, and we're happy to be involved to work with our partners as this moves forward and conversations around feasibility and the costs of conservation. Through our experience writing conservation agricultural easements, we know that language really matters. It can have significant implications and needs careful consideration. And we just see this as being an important piece to keep in mind as the ordinance revision process continues.
Right. Thank you very much.
I apologize for speaking so quickly.
Yeah, I apologize. I actually sort of stopped my timer in deference to the fact that you're a possible partner as we move forward. You've definitely exceeded the 3 minutes.
So I did go over the 3 minutes. Oh, I thought I hadn't heard the ringing, so.
I guess my question to you is, did we not invite you to present?
Yes, so because all of the questions that you had asked were covered by the Maine Department of Ag, Conservation and Forestry, I wanted to just make my comments as part of this public comment.
Okay, I seem to remember that in the email thread. I just wanted to make sure that we had invited you because.
No.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks, Shelley. Actually, before my 3 minutes start, can you bring up our map with all the pink on it?
Don't worry,
Pink parcels, the southern.
I like to think I'm not so hard that if you need a few,
I just want to conserve that time. Thank you. Michelle Malorano. I own ag zone property on Trap Road and operate a small agricultural business from that property. I think you've definitely heard me say some of this before. A couple of points that I'd like to continue to make. For the almost 3 decades that I've owned my property on Trap Road, the city has emphatically maintained that urban sprawl in the Ag RP zone should not be allowed due to the immense strain that it would place on fire, police, public services, and the schools. My question is, what has changed within our infrastructure that now makes it a good idea to consider urban sprawl? If those changes haven't already occurred, we should probably consider what the costs will be to the city in order to put those pieces into play so that there are adequate services. Again, one of the maps that shows, this map in particular shows a lot of the pink colored areas that can be subdivided and developed according to the proposal. In the lower half, lower 1/3 of the city, and I know this is far away, but I've made a dark line here, and it is below the response times on this map. This map shows the 3 fire departments that are located not even on this particular map. So there's an additional map from this matrix report that shows the potential to the addition of a 4th fire station, which would provide coverage, but I don't think that's anywhere in the next few years in terms of building a new fire station for Auburn. So that's one point. Second point is that, again, the Permanent Ag Commission is something that was recommended by the ad hoc committee, the first group. That has sort of been swept under the rug, and I would like to see that no changes are made or considered to the ag zone until after that ag commission is in place. As an alternative, maybe we could roll the ag commission into the already existing conservation commission, as the ag zone is something that should be conserved. It does definitely fall underneath the umbrella of conservation. I would like you to continue to consider that the proposal before you is really more about development than it is about the protection of the agriculture and resource protection zone. It's really not based in the protection or the conservation of these areas. One final point, I think it would be really interesting to research how many people, how many of us already in the ag zone are operating agricultural businesses on our properties that have been, that are proven. We've been in existence for 3 to 5 years. There are several folks who do want to build on their properties. Let's give them maybe the priority and see how many of those folks actually will be able to build finally on their property that they've been farming for so long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Signe Lynch and I'm from Farmland, Maine, and I'm actually a Bates College student and part of the environmental studies program there, and have been working on the Ag Zone project, this semester-long project, along with 2 other students from Bates and a team of faculty advisors as well as community partners here in Auburn. And really, I just want to put it on public record that we will be having a final report coming out in the next 2 weeks that will be available to the public. And this project was really rooted in exploring land use changes in this agriculture and protection district and all throughout Auburn. So we were using aerial imagery from 1973 and looking at aerial imagery that hasn't been looked at by Auburn from 2018 and looking at those comparisons of where we've seen changes to the ag zone being made, and particularly looking at development and changes in agricultural development. The final report is going to be around 60 pages. It will be on the city website, hopefully, and downloadable PDF that anyone will be able to view in the next 2 weeks. It also has a whole section about alternatives that were talked about in the workshop that are more in depth, including things like cluster development and plans for rezoning. And I'm just putting this out there as it becomes another resource in these conversations about what's going to happen with the future of ag zone, and having that historical context in forms of mapping and seeing how those changes have actually occurred over time is really important. And in discussion of those things that we actually had a community event, special event last night in the community room, with a presentation of the information that we found over the course of the semester. There was a great turnout and a lot of positive conversation that came out of that. And as part of those conversations, the recommendation that we are making is we do have maps that were put together, but for the city to explore a potential summer internship, whether that's for a high school student or a college student over the summer, working in GIS and looking at those classifications to make sure that the data that is coming out of those and can be incorporated into these conversations is as accurate as it possibly can be. So if it's okay, I'd like to just hand out some of the maps that we've put together to this group, and also just make it known that I am available to anyone in the crowd here that wants to have conversations about the work that's been going on there. Great. Can I actually give
I want to say, first of all, thank you very much. I don't know who else was able to attend. I was unable to attend, however, I did get a chance to watch earlier today. It was uploaded.
Great.
And good job on your hard work. So.
Great, thank you. Can I hand maps out to
yeah, sure,
planning board
absolutely.
if that's possible? And we'll have extra copies for people in the public if they're interested.
While those maps are being handed out, is there anyone else that would like to come speak? Mr. Walker?
Good evening. My name is Susan Melcher, and I live at 736 South Witham Road. And I am also a teacher with the Auburn School Department, and I think Auburn is one of the best places to live in the state of Maine. I think among other things we should consider, instead of sprawling out all over the place, is building a real strong sense of community and looking at some of the things that the city of Augusta is doing. They're revitalizing their downtown, which is beautiful like ours is. We have the river and a lot of gorgeous buildings. And the city of Waterville is doing the same thing. So our downtown could really attract a lot of young people who are not really interested in living out in the outskirts of town, but are more interested in places where they can walk to. Their children can play in the city playgrounds, and they can go Sunday morning out for brunch without having to get in a car and drive, and that's kind of where people are moving. So I think we should open up our minds to many more opportunities that we can do to revitalize Auburn, and I'm guessing we want to increase our tax base, and we also want to attract people to our beautiful area. We have the opportunity to do a lot more in the ag zone than we have been, and we can attract people and farmers, but we should also look at making Auburn great overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julia Harper. I live in Lewiston, but I'm the coordinator for the Good Food Council of Lewiston-Auburn. And the council didn't have time to put together like a full letter to the planning board, but just wanted to share some brief comments. So the Good Food Council of Lewiston-Auburn is a community-based organization that works to support improvements to the food system of the Lewiston-Auburn community through education, evaluating and influencing policy, supporting communication, identifying gaps, and supporting resources that meet local programs that meet local needs. So obviously this is a complicated issue that has far-ranging implications to everyone in the city as well as the wider area. So the Food Council is hoping to, advocate for a continued thoughtful, transparent process and decision-making that gets to a widely supported solution that benefits all the stakeholders whom the zone was intended to support, which includes farming, forestry, and natural resource protection. And as well as being, fair to the folks who, the long-standing landowners in the zone. So, as we keep hearing, there's been, over the past 3 years, several disparate kind of processes to research and come up with data and answers to this question. And so just, we really appreciate, the efforts of staff and this committee to kind of continue to fold all of these efforts together, as well as to continue to look at what other research might be needed. So some of the context we see is that there's a high level of interest in this topic in Auburn. We hosted with a lot of planning partners, a Lewis and Auburn Region Farmland Access and Growing the Food Economy Conference on March 7th, and it was sold out by, we had 100-person capacity at the Auburn Senior Community Center, and we had a waiting list. And we asked a lot of really incredible conversations came out of that, but also in the post-event survey, just wanted to highlight that we asked people what improvements would they like to see in their home or city town related to food and or farming in the next 5 to 10 years. And folks, the highest response was around smart zoning changes that had more effective to support farming and sensible farmland protection. We also asked if you are seeking farmland in the Lewis and Auburn area, ideally how many acres of land are you hoping to own or lease in the next 5 to 10 years? And the average was 20 to 25 acres of land folks were looking for. And it's just wanted to point out that that's quite a bit different than the 3 to 10 acre minimum house size or lot size that's being proposed. And although this is like a small sample size, we would need to substantiate with bigger more data. It's definitely indicative, I think, of something important to pay attention to. Also, the Bates student presentation last evening was really great information, and I think it was just evident at the conversations afterwards. There was a desire for more information around what are the needs of the community and what are just additional data being needed. And I think that we are very fortunate to have many post-secondary institutions in this area, including Bates, that could kind of continue this work. They would have less demands on staff time, and I know the Good Food Council and a lot of other community partners would be interested in kind of playing a role in that. And I know I'm over my time, I'm gonna wrap up really quickly. The council is hoping also that the Ag Advisory Board, as reflected, is a very important piece and will be implementing the proposed revised ordinance. So please consider creating the Ag Advisory Board before the final ordinance is put into place. One potential structure could also be that it is a subcommittee of the planning board. There are many different models, but that one also seems like it's worth considering. A set of agreed upon goals and values for what changes to the zone could achieve would be great. Some of the things that we've heard is that obviously any changes should benefit the stakeholders for whom the zone was intended to support, and for the viability of future farms, we know that the ordinance needs to be flexible in order to support future versions of farming that have not yet been imagined. And we need to keep minimum and large parcels intact for viability of future farms, and soils of statewide importance need to be considered not to be house lot sites, and so on. And we hope that the Auburn planning staff will eventually be taking these and kind of shaping these into a next version of a draft. Also, Stephanie's point about the state needing to review the final so that the city is protected against anyone suing against violations of best management practices. Again, I think that, you know, research it's clear that additional research could be done, and there is just an incredible opportunity that that Auburn has in this, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this topic?
Good evening. My name's Keith Emerson, and I'm fortunate enough to have purchased some property from my dad a few years ago on Hobart Road and Soper's Mill. And I'm very thankful to see such a big turnout here tonight. It's a big discussion. I'm sure that's going to take some time to go through. And thankfully for all the farmers that are in the area, there's been a lot of care put into that as well. I have only 2 questions, and I'll make it really short. I wasn't able to see, is this particular map and the maps we have, is that on the websites that we were given? Okay,
yes.
that's
on the ag
that's
portal.
fine.
Yes.
And the addendum, as far as that goes on that as well, is probably, you know, there were some websites I didn't look at, so I was just curious to know that.
Yeah, it is on the ag portal, and it is also in the planning board packet.
Fantastic. I was going to make it short. Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this topic?
Good evening. My name is Peter Moore. I'm a landowner on the Jordan School Road, and I have been a member of the Mayor's Action Group on the Ag Zone. I'd like to just set a slightly different context for my comments, and I've testified before to the planning board that I think one of the fundamental issues here is an issue of fairness, and sadly the Ag Zone ordinance enacted nearly 60 years ago created really 2 classes of landowners. It may not have been intentional, but that's the actual effect of the ordinance. On the one hand, you have the landowners who happen to be living on their land at the time the ordinance was enacted, and then you had landowners where there was no residence on that land. And the landowners who had a residence on their land at the time of the ordinance enactment, they were grandfathered from the provisions of the ordinance. So not only did they not have an obligation to earn a living from agriculture or meet the 50% income test, there was no land use, no necessity for agricultural activity on their land, even though many of those people were farmers at the time. Remarkably, it was largely the farming community that gave impetus to this ordinance, but they exempted themselves from the very nature of the ordinance. So over time, there's been a resentment that has developed, and that's partly why there's a motivation by people in the city today to change that. And I think that if we don't make the changes that have been submitted to you from the various committees and the Mayor's Action Group, it would be a sad day, frankly. The ordinance should also be changed in a way that, on a go-forward basis, all the landowners in the Ag Zone should be treated the same way. I remember in the old City Hall on Court Street, there used to be a plaque in the offices of City Hall, and it said one of the mission statement points was that the city treat all residents and landowners and taxpayers the same.
with respect to all the rules and regulations of the city. And this does not do that. It's created this class distinction, and resentment is part of the consequence of that. So it would be good if we could really end that. And one way to end that would be to put a sunset on the exemptions that have existed on landowners that had residences on their land back when the ordinance was enacted, and then have some sunset provision so eventually those properties also become subject to the ordinance at large. I also think we have a big economic opportunity here. The ordinance has effectively created a building moratorium on 40% of the landmass of the city for the last 55 plus years. And that's an unfortunate consequence because it's put a disproportionate tax burden on the rest of the taxpayers of the city to shoulder the burden where there could have been economic development. A simple equation, if you look at if there could be over, say, 10 years, an additional 200 homes built, farmsteads of some kind, where the average investment might be $500,000 for a brand new home, farm buildings, other improvements. That could create $100 million of assessed value and about $2.3 million in additional tax revenue. That would certainly help the city avoid future tax increases, or at least temper them in some regard. So there's economic activity, there's a fairness issue, and frankly, I think we've done enough studies, reports, committees, and the like. I think it's time that some decisions are made, and I hope that you'll take into consideration this fairness issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this issue?
My name is Scott Efland. I also live on Jordan School Road, and I wasn't planning on speaking, but the last speaker moved me to speak. I'd just like to point out, I don't think there's a lot of people who have $500,000 to invest in a farm operation in Auburn. And also, in terms of the fairness issue, I recently bought about 2 years ago, I bought a second lot on Jordan School Road, and it was very inexpensive because of the zoning, and I don't feel unfairly treated because of that, because I didn't spend a lot of money for that lot. I bought it knowing that it would not be able to be built on. And I'd also like to say that even though it would be to my financial advantage if I was able to build on it, I would rather have that land preserved as forest. And the other issue which I'd just like to raise is that when I drive to Portland, I usually take the back roads, and one of the things I've seen over the 25 years I've lived on Jordan School Road is very large houses being built on very large lots for wealthy people who are commuting into Portland. And it is my expectation that if the ordinance is passed as originally written, that is what we're going to see in that area of Auburn, in the southern part of Auburn, within a few years. One of the things that really struck me on the presentation from the Bates students is if you compare the rural residential areas 43 years ago and last year, there was a huge amount of development that occurred at a time when the population of the city as a whole declined significantly. And I would see that pattern continuing as more people move out. There's going to be fewer middle-class people living in the city, and it's going to become more of a divide between the suburban area that used to be the ag zone and the urban area that becomes a home for low-income people who have who are going to create major issues in terms of taxes and other issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this topic? On behalf of the Planning Board, I would like to thank all of you for sharing your ideas, your concerns, your thoughts tonight. This is the point of doing workshops. We try our best to do our best for our city, and it really helps us do our best when our fellow citizens are actively involved in helping us with that. So to that end, thank you very much. The next item on our agenda was a public hearing to discuss the Marijuana Committee initiated proposed amendment to Article 13, Environmental Performance Standards, odors. The city planner and I spoke prior to the meeting. Given the weather and the hour and the nature of this, I set a hard deadline of 8 o'clock, such that if we did not get to this item by 8 o'clock, I would not hear it. However, before I dismiss the item, is there anyone that came tonight to speak specific to the odor ordinance? Okay, seeing none, I guess I won't have to handle that. At this point, ironically, we'll open it up to the next item, which is public comment. Okay, great. Next on our agenda under miscellaneous are staff updates on upcoming projects. Is there anything that we should be aware of?
No.
Great. Well, I mean, not great, really. We'd love to hear that there's an amazing project coming, but, you know. Any planning board member updates that they feel are pertinent for the board? All right, great. I would seek a motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Made, seconded, in favor?
Hey.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you guys for coming.